I went to see my best friend, but it was his mother who made me stay. Her smile, her quiet warmth, and that teasing line I still can't forget, "You came for him, but you stayed for me." It started as a simple visit, nothing more than a plan to catch up with my best friend after years apart. He'd recently moved back into his mother's home for a while, and when he invited me over, I didn't think twice. I just wanted to reconnect, laugh, maybe relive old memories. But when I rang the doorbell that Saturday morning, the person who opened the door wasn't him, it was his mother, Elena. For a second, I almost didn't recognize her. The years had added a quiet grace to her, soft lines that didn't age her but deepened her beauty. She wore a light cream blouse, sleeves rolled to her elbows, her hair loosely pinned up. The faint scent of coffee and gardenia followed her as she smiled, eyes widening with pleasant surprise. "Look at you," she laughed softly. "You've grown into someone I'd never walk past without turning twice." I didn't know how to respond. My heart thudded once, awkwardly, before I managed to say, "It's really good to see you, Mrs. Hale." "Please," she said, with a small tilt of her head. "It's Elena now. Mrs. Hale makes me sound like someone's distant aunt." Her voice had that calm, melodic confidence that instantly softened a room. Inside, the house was the same, familiar yet more alive. The walls carried faint hints of new art, photos of family moments, and sunlight spilling lazily across polished wood floors. She offered tea while we waited for my friend, who was apparently running a little late. The conversation began lightly, about travel, work, and how fast time had passed, but something about her presence made it feel different. Like every word carried a quiet pulse beneath it. Her laughter lingered a beat too long. Her eyes held mine for a second too steady. It wasn't intentional, at least, I told myself it wasn't. When I reached for my cup, her hand brushed mine. Just a passing touch, yet it sent a warmth up my arm that had nothing to do with the tea. She noticed it too, I could tell by the way her breath hitched slightly, almost imperceptibly. Then she smiled, that teasing curve of her lips both playful and knowing. "You came for him," she said softly, "but I'm the one keeping you company now." And before I could even think of what to say, she looked away, leaving that line hanging in the air, like a spark that refused to die out. It didn't take long for that one afternoon to stretch into many. What began as polite conversation turned into something far more effortless, the kind of connection that slips past logic and simply happens. Every time I came over to see my friend, Elena somehow ended up there too, sometimes in the kitchen, sometimes on the porch, sometimes just walking through the room at the right moment. It wasn't deliberate, at least, not on the surface. One rainy evening, my friend was caught up on a long call upstairs. Elena and I were left downstairs, the storm outside softening the world into silence. The living room glowed with that amber light that rain seems to draw out of everything, warm, quiet, and impossibly close. She sat by the window, her legs folded neatly beneath her, a mug of tea in her hands. "You know," she said, her eyes following the streaks of rain across the glass, "there's something oddly comforting about bad weather. It gives you permission to just pause." I smiled, sitting down beside her, not too close, but close enough to feel the subtle warmth radiating from her. "You sound like someone who doesn't pause very often." Her lips curved faintly. "Maybe not anymore." There was a pause, the kind that holds more meaning than a sentence ever could. I found myself watching the way her thumb traced the rim of her cup, slow, thoughtful, distracted. She turned to me suddenly. "You're different from how I remember you. Calmer. More grounded. Or maybe you're just seeing me properly for the first time," I said before I could stop myself. She laughed softly, not mockingly but with something gentler, something that lingered. "Maybe I am." For a while, neither of us spoke. The rain tapped gently on the window. My friend's voice carried faintly from upstairs, but it felt far away, like we were in another world, wrapped in quiet understanding. Then, without looking at me, she said, "You remind me of how open I used to be. Before life got so careful. There was a sadness in her tone that I didn't know how to answer. So I didn't. I just stayed beside her, close enough for our knees to brush lightly when she shifted. She didn't pull away. She just smiled faintly, almost to herself, and whispered, "It's strange, how some people make you feel seen again." Outside, the rain kept falling, blurring the world beyond the window, but in that soft, golden room, I saw her more clearly than ever before. The next afternoon was bright and quiet, the kind of day that made the world feel lighter after last night's rain. My friend had gone out to meet someone, leaving the house still. I found Elena in the garden, crouched by a row of potted ferns, her hair loosely tied and a few stray strands catching sunlight like silk threads. She looked up when she saw me, smiling easily. "You're early," she said. "I'm just trying to save these poor plants from overwatering myself." I offered to help, mostly to have a reason to stay. We worked side by side, laughter breaking the stillness every now and then as she teased me for being too gentle with the soil. At one point, she reached for a heavy pot just as I did, and our hands collided. The pot wobbled, almost slipping, but we caught it together, her palm pressing firmly over mine. It wasn't a dramatic moment, yet it felt like the air had been stolen from the garden. We froze there, both holding the same weight, neither daring to move. I could feel the warmth of her skin, the slight tremor in her breath. The world narrowed, just the two of us, the soft buzz of bees, and the sound of our hearts learning a new rhythm. Her eyes lifted to mine, a flicker of uncertainty flashing through the calm confidence she usually carried. It was gone a moment later, replaced by a nervous little laugh. "I should probably let you handle the heavy lifting," she murmured, withdrawing her hands slowly, fingertips grazing my wrist as she did. I smiled faintly, unsure what to say, or what not to. She stood, brushing soil from her palms, her composure returning like the closing of a book. "You have this habit," she said quietly, "of looking at people like you're trying to read them." "Maybe I am," I admitted. "And what do you think you've read so far?" I hesitated, then chose honesty. "That you miss being truly seen." That time, she didn't respond. She just looked at me, long enough for the silence to mean everything. Then she turned toward the house, her voice soft as she said, "You shouldn't notice things like that." Later that evening, my phone buzzed. A message from her, "Thank you for helping today, and for not saying anything." I stared at it for a long time before typing back, then deleted what I wrote and left it unsent. Because some things didn't need words. Not yet. The next day, something between us had shifted, too subtle to name, too strong to ignore. She avoided looking at me for most of the morning, though her every movement betrayed a kind of restless energy. When I greeted her in the kitchen, she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was the kind of smile that's used to cover the very thing it wants to hide. My friend had plans that evening, dinner with someone from work, which meant it would just be the two of us again. I offered to help set the table, hoping to ease the tension that clung between us. The kitchen was softly lit, the air filled with the smell of garlic and rosemary. Elena moved around quietly, graceful as ever, her blouse sleeves rolled to her elbows, the faint rhythm of her bracelets matching her steps. At first, neither of us spoke. Then she broke the silence with a sigh that sounded heavier than it should have been. "You ever notice," she said, not looking at me, "how the house gets louder when it's empty?" I frowned slightly. "Louder?" She smiled faintly, still chopping vegetables. "Not literally. Just, when you've spent too many years surrounded by people, silence becomes a noise of its own. And it follows you everywhere." Her voice trembled on that last word. It was barely noticeable, but it made something inside me ache. Without thinking, I set down the plates and reached across the counter, gently placing my hand over hers. She froze for a moment, the knife paused midair, then slowly set it aside. Her hand was cool at first, then warm against mine. She didn't look up, but her shoulders eased, the tension fading just a little. "I didn't mean to sound pathetic," she whispered. You didn't, I said softly. You sounded honest. That made her look at me finally, really look. There was a flicker of something in her gaze, not quite sadness, not quite longing, but something caught in between. Honest, she repeated, almost like she was testing the word. Then she smiled, small, tired, beautiful. Careful, or you'll make me start talking about things I've promised myself not to feel. I didn't reply. I just squeezed her hand gently before letting go. We went back to setting the table like nothing had happened, but everything had. And later, when the house fell quiet again, I realized what she meant, how silence could indeed be the loudest thing in the room. The following afternoon, I found her in the garden again. It had become her refuge, the one place she could tend to something living and fragile without needing to explain herself. The sun was warm, the kind that settled on skin rather than scorched it, and a soft breeze moved through the jasmine vines along the fence. She was kneeling in the soil, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a loose linen shirt that fluttered lightly with every gust of wind. For a moment, I just watched her, the way her fingers brushed gently through the earth, how her movements carried both care and quiet sadness. She must have sensed me, because without turning, she said, "You came for him again?" Her voice held that familiar teasing lilt, but underneath it was something different, softer, almost fragile. I smiled faintly. "You make it sound like a bad thing." She stood, brushing dirt from her palms. "Oh, it's not bad. Just, interesting." Then she finally turned to face me, her expression unreadable, eyes steady. "You came for him," she said, pausing for a breath, "but I think you stayed for me." The air between us shifted, heavy, still, electric. For once, I didn't have words. I could only meet her gaze, trying to read the mixture of apology and courage in it. "Elena," I started, but she lifted a hand slightly, silencing me. "I know what you're going to say," she whispered. "That it's complicated. That it's wrong. That people would talk." She laughed quietly then, the sound thin and shaky. "Believe me, I've told myself the same things 100 times." Her voice wavered, but she didn't look away. "It's just, for the first time in a long while, I don't feel invisible. You make me remember the parts of myself I'd stopped recognizing." She took a step closer, not enough to close the space between us, but enough that I could smell the faint scent of jasmine in her hair. "I'm not supposed to feel this way," she said softly, eyes glistening with the weight of everything unsaid. "But I do." A bird called in the distance, the sound breaking the stillness. I wanted to reach for her, to say something that would make sense of it all, but I didn't. Because sometimes, silence carries more truth than words ever can. The wind moved gently through the garden, stirring the leaves around us. And even as we stood there, not touching, I felt closer to her than I ever had before. After that day in the garden, everything between us became quiet, not cold, just, suspended. We still spoke, but our words were careful, trimmed of anything that might reveal too much. It was as though both of us were protecting something fragile, a moment, a feeling, that neither of us was brave enough to name. My friend told me he'd be leaving again soon for a work trip. I tried to act normal, nodding, pretending it didn't matter, but it did. It meant that this small, accidental world we'd built, the late talks, the glances that lingered too long, the quiet understanding, was coming to an end. That evening, the house felt emptier than usual. My friend had already left to pack at a friend's place, leaving just Elena and me. I found her standing in the hallway, one hand resting lightly against the doorframe as though she'd been waiting. "You're leaving tomorrow?" she asked. I nodded. "Early morning." She gave a faint smile. "You've gotten good at pretending things don't matter." The word stung, because she was right. I opened my mouth to respond, but she continued softly, "It's okay. I do it too." We ended up sitting on the porch, the night warm and still. The garden lights cast a soft amber glow across her face, and for a while, we just watched the sky, neither of us brave enough to look at the other. Finally, she spoke, almost to herself. "Thank you." "For what?" I asked. "For reminding me what it feels like to be seen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't try to fix me. You just noticed." I turned toward her then, and the way she looked at me, calm, kind, and impossibly sad, made it hard to breathe. I didn't move at first. But when she leaned slightly closer, I met her halfway. Her lips didn't quite reach mine, instead, they brushed softly against my cheek, lingering just long enough for me to feel the warmth of her breath. It wasn't a kiss of passion, it was something gentler, deeper. A quiet acknowledgement of everything we had felt but never said. When she pulled back, she smiled faintly, eyes shimmering in the dim light. "Good night," she whispered. "Don't make me miss you too much." I wanted to tell her it was too late for that. But the words stayed where they belonged, in the silence between us, where they would live forever. Time, as it always does, moved on. Days became weeks, and weeks folded into months. Life returned to its usual rhythm, work, noise, familiar faces, yet somewhere beneath all of it, her presence lingered like a half-remembered melody. I told myself it was just nostalgia, a passing ache, the echo of something that was never meant to be. But some mornings, I'd catch myself thinking of her without warning, the soft lilt of her laughter, the way her voice would drop when she said something honest, the gentle brush of her hand against mine that night on the porch. We didn't talk much after I left, not the way we used to. Every now and then, my phone would light up with her name. A message. Short, simple. "The jasmine bloomed early this year." Or, "You'd laugh, I overwatered the ferns again." Little things. But they meant everything. Each message carried her calm warmth, and every time I read one, I felt the quiet hum of that same garden air, soft sunlight, faint breeze, the space between us alive with all the things we never said. Months later, I found myself driving through her town again. I told myself I wouldn't stop by. But some promises are made to be broken. When she opened the door, her surprise melted instantly into a smile, that same teasing, knowing smile that had started everything. She looked just as I remembered, graceful, self-assured, and gently radiant in a way that didn't demand attention but held it effortlessly. "You came for him again?" she asked, that familiar spark in her eyes. I couldn't help but laugh. "You already know the answer." For a heartbeat, the air between us filled with unspoken memories, afternoons in the kitchen, quiet rain by the window, the soft confession in her garden. Everything was still there, just quieter now. She stepped aside to let me in. "Tea." "Always," I said. As she turned toward the kitchen, I noticed a small potted fern on the windowsill, thriving, green, and unmistakably alive. I smiled without meaning to. She glanced back, catching me looking. "I didn't overwater this one," she said softly. And in that small, unassuming moment, in her voice, her presence, her ease, I realized something simple and profound: we hadn't needed to name what we were. It had already found a place to exist, not in the past, not in the future, but in the quiet understanding that still lived between us. Some stories don't end. They just learn how to stay. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes that love isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's just quietly unforgettable.